5 months on, the needle is moving, but by how much? The United States, for the first time, lifting its veto on a UN resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. In past conflicts, whenever Washington's called time, Israel's bended. But what's to say the story follows the pattern this time? For residents of Gaza, day 172 of the war offers no respite, with renewed airstrikes. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pushing back against Washington's growing pressure. So what's the Biden administration's next move? And can we call this a turning point? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the pressure, both domestic and foreign, on Benjamin Netanyahu. And with us is, in the France 24 debate, is France 24's Shirley Sitbon. How are you?
Good. How are you?
All right. From Jerusalem, journalist and former Labour member of the Israeli parliament, Daniel Ben-Simon. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
And from Tel Aviv, pollster and commentator Mitchell Barak. Good to see you.
Good to see you. From Jerusalem, though.
You're from Jerusalem. Everybody's in Jerusalem. Thanks for the correction. Your reactions on the hashtag F24 debate. On the day after the UN call for a ceasefire, the prospect of guns going silent seems further, not closer. This after some one-upmanship by Hamas, Israel quitting truce talks in Doha, and continuing with its campaign in Gaza. 8 children among those killed in an airstrike on the southernmost city of Rafah. More than 24, according to the Hamas-controlled medical authorities, killed in a strike near Al-Shifa Hospital in the north. Meanwhile, there's that diplomatic storm with allies exposing their differences. Karis Garland has that story.
While Israel seeks to minimize civilian...
2 historic allies seemingly caught in a deepening rift. For the first time since the war began, Washington chose not to veto a UN resolution that calls for a ceasefire in Gaza, a red line for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who immediately scrapped an Israeli delegation's visit to Washington this week.
This constitutes a clear departure from the consistent U.S. position in the Security Council since the beginning of the war.
The resolution demands Hamas and other militants free hostages from Gaza, but Israel took issue with the fact the text does not directly link a release to the ceasefire. The U.S. says it abstained from the vote because the text did not condemn Hamas for the October 7 attacks, though it did support ongoing diplomatic efforts. American officials later played down the abstention, pointing out that the resolution was non-binding and suggested Netanyahu was trying to manufacture a crisis in U.S.-Israel ties.
We're kind of perplexed by this. It seems like the Prime Minister's office is choosing to create a perception of daylight here when they don't need to do that. So again, no change in our policy.
While it denies any policy shift, the U.S. has taken an increasingly tougher line in recent weeks. Biden has called Israel's fighting, quote, over the top, and has appeared to lose patience in repeatedly urging Israel to let more humanitarian aid into the Strip. Despite the scrapping of the Israeli delegation's visit, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant held talks with U.S. officials in Washington Monday. Secretary of State Antony Blinken reiterated opposition to a Rafah ground offensive, noting there were alternatives.
Talks are continued into Tuesday. More on that in a moment. But first, Daniel Ben-Simon, is this a turning point?
Well, I do believe it is. It is because this is the first time that we hear a new voice from the Americans, not just working for the Israelis, but really giving their own view on the matters of things. And it's about time. It's about time because we've been we've been immobile for 160 days or 70 days. Something has to be done, and it has to be done from the Americans. Israelis still trust the Americans, except for Netanyahu, because Netanyahu, if he goes in collision with the Americans, he might lose his job because the Israelis would rather work with the Americans than with the prime minister who's not doing much. So in a way, this crisis come on time.
And so what happens next?
What happens next is that the President Biden has to be assertive on the question of this war with the Hamas, and share his views with Netanyahu and maybe use a kind of tougher language. Either you do this or we get out of the game, because this cannot go on like this. 170 days with so many Israelis there in underground. Something radical has to be done, and unfortunately, it has not been done until now. And maybe out of this crisis will come out something positive. Maybe Netanyahu will take the Americans seriously, because he plans to go and speak to the American Congress, which can delay the whole thing for weeks and maybe more. So something, as I said, President Biden has to take a decision as to how to deal with Prime Minister Netanyahu.
The writing was on the wall 10 days ago already when the most powerful Jew in Washington, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, said that, quote, Netanyahu had lost his way. But it's not just staunch defenders of Israel inside the Democratic Party who've been speaking up. In a Monday interview with right-wing daily Israel Hayom, Donald Trump warning Israel has to be very careful because you're losing a lot of the world. Quote, you're losing a lot of support. You have to finish up. You have to get the job done. And you have to get on to peace, to get on to a normal life for Israel and for everybody else. Mitchell Barak, this is the Donald Trump who moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. If even he is cautioning Israel, what does that tell you?
Well, the U.S. Embassy is 500 meters from my house. It's around the corner. So we welcome that move. I think it's much more significant what Chuck Schumer said and what Donald Trump said to Israel, and specifically singling out Netanyahu, than the UN Security Council, which I would think is more of an indictment of the Security Council that equates Israel with the Hamas in the same way and said, one has to release the hostages, one has to have a temporary ceasefire. It just makes the UN Security Council look bad. It does seem that Netanyahu and Israel in general is losing ground in America, which is very, very significant and critical, because the U.S. support is really what is keeping us going here and defending the state of Israel and defending 9 million Israeli people here. But that remains to be seen what's going to come next. Netanyahu is a master at American politics, and as Daniel Ben-Simon said, he may go and speak to the Republican-led Congress. He knows how to play the internal politics. This is also an election year, so don't discount the fact that this could be some kind of victory or change, supposed change in policy for the Biden administration, telling Israel that they now have to have a ceasefire. But at the end of the day, listen to what John Kirby in the White House said, which is nothing has really changed. So different people may interpret it different ways. I think things on the ground are going to remain the same. Israel will continue fast moving forward with destroying the Hamas and trying to get the hostages back.
And do you agree with Daniel that that in the interest of Israel, Joe Biden now needs to follow up with an even stronger statement?
Are you asking me?
No, I'm asking Mitchell Barak.
Okay.
I don't think he will, come up with a stronger statement. I mean, I think that the idea here is the Israeli defense minister is in Washington. Yoav Gallant, as you reported. There was supposed to be, and probably still will be, a delegation going to Washington to talk about the next moves in Gaza, being the Rafah area. At the same time, there is a negotiating team in Qatar, although a skeletal one, we're told, of Israelis. But the U.S. administration is putting a massive amount of effort, both from the director of the CIA into the national security advisor, into the White House, and President Biden himself. He's emotionally and tied to this issue, and it is absorbing a lot of his time and effort. Now, again, he has an internal political issue with people in the Democratic Party, with some public opinion, although I think that most of the public opinion in the United States is solidly behind Israel and against terrorism and against people that are, taking hostages and killing innocent civilians. At the same time, it's difficult to see the pictures in Gaza. It's difficult to see that people are lacking maybe food and water, and that the Israel and others are trying to get humanitarian aid in. It's very, very difficult. But as I've said before, the Hamas built about 250 miles of tunnels or more. That's enough of a tunnel to get from New York to Washington, D.C., and easily 2 million people could safely be in that tunnel. 2 million Gazans could be in that tunnel, and not one would be killed by any bombs or anything else. But the Hamas doesn't open those tunnels, and they didn't build them for the people of Gaza. They built them for their own terror organization.
Shirley Sitbon, this abstention by the United States, it comes more than 5 months after the beginning of the war. And sitting here in Paris, we all recall that first Monday after the Hamas attack, when the Eiffel Tower was lit up in the blue and white of the Israeli flag. A lot has happened since then. Do you feel like we're at a turning point?
Yes, I do. And I must say, I agree that it's not necessarily the decision, the vote at the UN, that will make the Israelis change their mind. It is their allies, this pressure, and hearing Donald Trump also telling the Israelis, Benjamin Netanyahu, that he needs to finish this up. This is what makes the difference, the fact that the Israelis may lack weapons, but the Americans also saying, and many people saying, that if Benjamin Netanyahu is criticizing so much the Biden administration for this decision at the UN, well, it's also maybe because he wants to put the blame on them, saying, I wanted to go to Rafah and finish and succeed and win the war. It's the Americans who are blocking this. They're disrupting this. And if I don't do it in the end, it's not because I don't want to. It's because the Americans stopped me and I didn't have a choice. So yes, but this could be a major turning point, of course, yes.
Daniel Ben-Simon, you agree with what Shirley Sitbon said, that in the end of the day, Benjamin Netanyahu will find a way to get political traction out of this pressure?
Well, I had to disagree with Shirley, which I don't know very personally. But I must say that Netanyahu has been supported by the Ashkenazi ultra-Orthodox, the Sephardi ultra-Orthodox, the religious, the people who are not in the center of Israeli society. They don't even serve in the army. So in a way, his support is very vague. It's not really something very solid. He cannot count on them because they don't have the support of the Israeli people. Israelis are
I'm not
losing
saying he
faith.
has a lot of support among the Israeli people. I'm saying he's using this, he's trying to use the U.S. position to say whatever happens on the ground, I could have won, but I didn't win because the Americans stopped us at the key moment, a crucial moment. But of course, in Israel, he doesn't have a lot of support. All polls show that.
Oh, yes, not at all. He's so isolated. We are so isolated as a country. Never before have we felt so isolated under a prime minister. And he is isolated even in Jerusalem, even in his own home, even in his own party. So we're coming to a showdown. And maybe in the next 2 weeks, we'll see what happens with Netanyahu. But I must say, no prime minister before him has experienced such a loneliness, such isolation, and he has to tell the Israelis what happened exactly. From the huge support 5 months ago after the attack in Gaza, what happened that we have become so isolated? Israelis hate to speak against the government, but I come from another ideology of this government. I don't care much, but it's in a way my country is not doing well because of this man. So something has to be done. He succeeded with Obama to isolate him and to win the elections. This time, it cannot happen once again.
Netanyahu recalled a delegation Monday that was supposed to travel to Washington, but his defense minister was already there, as we saw. Yoav Gallant maintaining his appointments. This Tuesday, it was with the U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, and that is important because, as you were saying, Shirley, Israel's relying on U.S. ammunition, most notably.
Yes, and the situation could become critical. And at first they were saying, well, the first countries that decided to stop sending weapons to Israel to show they disagree with what's happening in Gaza were Italy, Canada, and the Israelis were saying, well, this is really minor. We don't use a lot of their weapons, maybe 1%, I read in some areas. But now this is getting really critical and could become critical anyway. So now the Israelis are looking at this statement of Anthony Blinken saying there are other ways of beating, of destroying, of weakening Hamas than attacking Gaza on the ground. And now the Israelis are waiting to find that answer because they don't know how to beat Hamas. Their goal, the best choice, I guess, is to what they're saying now is to destroy as much as possible, and then to keep a sort of control from outside, going back into the Gaza Strip whenever there's Hamas gains momentum again. But they would like to have that solution the Americans are talking about.
How much of a key player, Mitchell Barak, is Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, part of that unity government war cabinet?
Well, it's interesting. He's a very key player. If you remember back in, I believe it was March of last year, Netanyahu actually wanted to fire him in the midst of this judicial reform, which turned out to be, reversed and split the whole country. Gallant was saying Israel is not prepared because there are a lot of reservists who are not going to show up because of the judicial reform. So he tried to fire him, and the outpouring of objection was so great that he stayed in his position. So in a certain way, he's a Likud figure who is in an opposition position sometimes against Netanyahu, and he is seen as someone as capable who is in charge of the military. Now,
if you're Netanyahu right now sitting back in Israel, do you see Gallant as a potential threat?
Everything is a threat at this point because this government is hanging on a string, on a thread. Meaning, ironically, and this wasn't brought up yet, we're in the midst of a war. 400,000 reservists have been called up, and Netanyahu has spent the last week, and including today, negotiating with the ultra-Orthodox parties to try and continue the exemption of ultra-Orthodox yeshiva students from serving in the army. It's ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous that we're in war, and he's trying to figure out how to get more Israeli religious people, ultra-Orthodox, out of the army. And Gallant has said that he will not accept certain compromises on this issue. That is more dangerous to this government than anything else that we've spoken up until now, because those ultra-Orthodox parties will leave if they cannot get the exemptions continued or increased. And that is really going to split apart. And also Gantz's party, first of all, Netanyahu and his coalition, he's lost a few seats of Gideon Sa'ar's party, which was together with Benny Gantz. Now, it's starting to crumble. How much it's going to crumble, we don't know. But this issue is something that can pull it apart, as well as what we've said on the program, the relations with the United States. It doesn't look great. Israelis, many of them are very, very grateful to the Biden administration for really saving Israel. The problem is now is many Israelis see that the job in Gaza has to be finished, and that means going into Rafah. And that means, moving the refugees there and continuing until Hamas is finished. And the Biden administration, to a certain extent, has said that they will not tolerate that. So that really puts the administration at loggerheads how to do that. That's why they're also pushing for a ceasefire at this point, in order to exchange hostages and then work on a more serious agreement.
It was immediately after the founding of the State of Israel that there was this exemption from serving in the military for the ultra-Orthodox. And as Mitchell was saying, at a time when Israel's discussing the extension of mandatory military service for most, opposition leader Benny Gantz warning that if the ultra-Orthodox aren't forced to also serve in the armed forces, he'll be quitting the government. A record 66,000 Haredi were exempted from military service last year, and they want to keep it that way.
We're demonstrating against forced army service. As religious Jews, the Israeli army contradicts our lifestyle. We prefer dying, we prefer filling the jails. To the army, we're not going. Full stop.
Daniel Ben-Simon, this is the crucial issue right now, whether the ultra-Orthodox serve in the military?
Not at all, but it is another problem among the Israelis, in the Israeli society. They have been with us since 1948. They have not contributed much in terms of security, but they are playing a major role in holding a right-wing government, and they are giving the support the right-wing Netanyahu needs. Netanyahu knows he knows how to speak to them. He knows how to make them feel important. He gives them money, he gives them anything. But in terms of participation in Israeli society, they are mostly absent. They spend most of their time in the yeshivot studying Torah, and in a way, they give Netanyahu the support he needs. But I think that Israelis are getting angrier and angrier. They would like to Benny Gantz, the man you showed a few seconds ago, to do something. Because for today, he's like he's a picture on the wall.
Okay, but Daniel, put yourself in Benny Gantz's shoes. If you bring down this unity government, if you force snap elections, which theoretically he can't even do because Netanyahu already has a 64-seat majority in parliament. But even if he does do so, he might regret what he wishes for, because then what follows is 3 months of a caretaker government led by Netanyahu.
You are right, and I'm right also in saying that we are in a moment of crisis. This is a time to make a decision and not to sit still like a picture on the wall. He has to take it. He used to be the chief of staff. We don't see him. We don't hear him. He is not fighting against what's happening with Netanyahu. It's amazing. And I'm asking myself, not only him, but Eisenkot, the other former chief of staff, also like a picture on the wall. We cannot afford today to have such two generals who are not doing anything. We're in a moment of a deep, deep crisis.
But then again, Shirley Sitbon, that could mean, if you're more dovish than hawkish in Israel, that you'll have 3 months where Netanyahu will have that bully pulpit of the prime minister's office to campaign on all by himself.
Yes, it could go in all directions. It could be extremely dangerous. But at the same time, with the U.S. being stricter, stronger, being more vocal, and trying to shift the Israeli operations in Gaza and the Israeli politics to be more a bit more moderate, we can say, then Netanyahu does have some kind of guards around, does have some people trying to keep him in the lane and not going too far, too extremist, too aggressive. But that would be a betting on his reactions to being reasonable and thinking about Israel's allies and trying to keep them as much as possible. But that's a danger, because the bet could be lost and he could go in all directions.
At the beginning of this conversation, Mitchell Barak, you were highlighting the fact that when it comes to politics, Benjamin Netanyahu is the ultimate survivor. After what we've just discussed, how unpopular some of his policies are right now, does it still seem that way?
Yeah, he just keeps going, and he is not going to give up. And just like he didn't give up when Bennett became prime minister and won the election, he's not going to give up now, because he sees himself and the state of Israel intertwined. He does not see the difference between the two, and that's where he's going. But we could have a change in government without an election, meaning people are not talking about this. But the Knesset structure is actually not a bad system when it comes to regime change in a crisis like this, because the 120 members of the Knesset, you need 61 to form a government. But even without election, besides a vote of no confidence, if there are some defectors, if Gantz leaves the government and there are some defectors from Netanyahu's own party, and on this yeshiva exemption issue there could be, or from some of the other coalition parties, people can find an agreed leader. And if 61 members of Knesset come forward and say, we would like to form a new government with this new leader, they can do it. And Netanyahu is out. It's legal. It's a political coup. And that's the way the system was designed. But Netanyahu has everyone stuck around him and not able to move. But there is an opportunity to do that without going to elections.
Daniel Ben-Simon, the most likely scenario?
Well, it's a very likely scenario, as the gentleman said now. But I must say that I think we're going to early elections. And Netanyahu, and listen to what I'm saying, he's going to lose big, because he's hated all over Israel because of what's happening in Gaza, and people staying underground for 160 days. He's not doing much except politics. I think that we Israelis will take revenge at him and will bring him down very, very soon. And this will be, I predict, the end of Benjamin Netanyahu. The magician has lost his magic among Israelis. I live here. I know the feeling, and I must say that he's gone too far, and maybe we're not going to see him in the long run.
All right, I see Mitchell Barak shaking his head, but unfortunately we're out of time for now. I want to thank you both gentlemen, Mitchell Barak, Dan Ben-Simon, for joining us from Jerusalem. I want to thank as well Shirley Sitbon. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.